There are moments in life that divide everything into a before and an after. The story I'm about to tell you today is about one of those moments, and I never imagined it would happen like this, on that December night, in the narrow hallway of my parents' house, with the musty smell of a leaking pipe and the darkness shattering every certainty I had. My name is Lucas, 24 years old, graphic designer. I moved back in with my father 6 months ago, out of financial necessity. The house is the same as always, except for one difference. My father married Raphael's mother. Raphael, my half-brother, 27 years old, is a plumber, the kind of guy who can fix anything. I'm the opposite. I live in my head, nervous with silence, useless with tools. We live under the same roof, share the same bathroom, but we've maintained a polite distance. Good morning, good night. Nothing beyond that. But what I didn't know was that night would bring a revelation capable of shaking the very foundations of our family forever. It was a Sunday. Late December, freezing cold outside, the kind of winter night where you're grateful for the warmth of the house. I had stayed up late working on a freelance project, one of those where you know the client's going to ask for hundreds of revisions, but you take it anyway because you need the money. It was almost 2 in the morning when I finally saved the file and shut down my computer. At 2 in the morning, I heard it. Urgent dripping. The pipe under the sink was leaking, a thick stream spreading water across the bathroom floor. Damn it. I tried to tighten it by hand. Nothing. Calling my father was out of the question. It was the middle of the night. That left Raphael, the guy who knows how to fix things. I hesitated. We barely talked, but the water just kept coming. I crossed the hallway to his door. I took a deep breath and knocked. I knocked, lightly, almost inaudible. I waited. Nothing. I knocked again, a bit harder. I heard movement inside. Footsteps. The door opened, and there he was. Raphael opened the door in just shorts, no shirt, his hair sticking up from sleep. The hallway light caught his broad shoulders, his built chest, the arms of someone who works with his hands for a living. I'd never really looked at him before. Not like this. And something shifted inside me, something I couldn't name. "Hey, sorry for waking you," I said, my voice coming out quieter than I meant to. "The bathroom pipe's leaking. Bad. Like, really bad. I don't know how to fix it." "Yeah, no problem. Let me grab my toolbox real quick." He disappeared and was back within seconds, tools in hand. He shut his bedroom door quietly. We both knew the house settled into that kind of silence where everything echoed. He walked with me toward the bathroom, and I went first, trying not to make the floorboards creak. But I could feel him behind me. His presence. The warmth of his body just a few feet away. The scent of soap and something that was just him. In the tiny bathroom, Raphael crouched under the sink. I tried not to look, but it was impossible to ignore the curve of his back, the muscles contracting, the confidence of his large hands handling the tool. "See this joint here?" he said quietly, his voice steady, focused. "That's where it's leaking. I'll shut off the valve and tighten it up. Won't take long." "Okay," I managed. My voice sounded weird to me, tight, but Raphael didn't seem to notice. He started working, the sound of the wrench, the scrape of metal, his breathing, my breathing. The silence between us, broken only by these small sounds. His phone's light illuminated the space in a fragmented way, creating shadows that moved on the walls. The darkness of the rest of the bathroom seemed dense, almost alive. I should have left, should have let him work alone. There was no reason for me to stay there, taking up space, watching. But I couldn't leave. I couldn't move. "You good?" he asked without looking up from the pipes. "You seem kind of tense." "Yeah, I'm fine," I said too fast. "Just tired, you know?" "Long night working?" "Yeah, freelance stuff, demanding client." He gave me a half smile, not taking his focus off what he was doing. "Tell me about it. I've had clients like that. Nothing's ever good enough." "Right?" "Exactly." He adjusted the wrench, tightened it once more. The leak stopped. He waited a few seconds, observing, confirming. Then he set down the tool. wiped his hands on an old towel that was lying nearby. "That's it. You're good. Thanks, really. I'm sorry for dragging you out of bed." He stood up. In that cramped bathroom, we were suddenly too close. I felt the heat from his body. I felt the weight of his gaze on mine. "Don't sweat it," he said. "This is what I do." He smiled then. Small. Real. And something inside me cracked open. Something that scared me and pulled me in at the same time. Logic said he should grab the toolbox and leave. Go back to his room. Go back to sleep. The work was done. There was no reason to stay. And I should thank him again, let him go, close the door, go back to my room, forget. But neither of us moved. And that's when the real danger began. We stood there, still, in the darkness broken only by the faint light of his phone still on the floor. The silence returned. But now, it was different. It wasn't the comfortable silence of people sharing a space without thinking. It was loaded silence, the kind of silence that says things words can't. I should have wanted him to leave, should have wanted my space back, my air back. But I didn't, and that terrified me. Because for the first time in my life, I was feeling something for a man that wasn't admiration, wasn't envy, wasn't friendship. It was something else, something bigger, something I didn't know how to handle, something that, if it was true, would change everything I thought I knew about myself, and I had no idea what to do with it. "So, why'd you move back in?" Raphael asked suddenly, looking at the toolbox, organizing things that were already organized. Was it just the money thing, or... The question blindsided me, not because of what he asked, but the way he asked it. Like he actually wanted to know, like he wasn't judging. I could have made something up, could have given him some easy answer better internet for freelance work, can't afford my own place right now, whatever. Something to shut down the conversation before it went somewhere I wasn't ready to go. But I didn't. I needed to get away, I heard myself say, from everything, everyone. He looked at me then, and there was no pity in his eyes. Thank God for that. There was something like recognition, like he'd been there before, like he knew exactly what I meant. "I get that," he said quietly, and then he stopped talking. "I went through something like that," he said. 2 years ago, I ended a serious relationship. I was pretty sure we were heading toward marriage. He closed the toolbox, but he didn't leave the bathroom. You lose track of who you are, you know. You're caught between who you used to be and trying to figure out who you're becoming now. I felt something tighten in my throat, because he had just put into words exactly what I was feeling. Exactly the confusion that had brought me back to this house, to this room that used to be mine, to this small, dark bathroom where a pipe leaked in the middle of the night. "Did you?" I asked quietly. "Go back to who you were before?" Raphael smiled then, but it was sad. Small, but honest. "No," he said. "You can't actually go back. You can only move forward. And moving forward means accepting that you've changed. That all those things you thought you knew about yourself, they're not true anymore." He paused. Or maybe they never were. He looked at me again, and this time I held his gaze, even with my heart beating too fast, even with the urge to look away, to run, to pretend this conversation wasn't happening. But I held it, because, for the first time in months, I felt seen, not judged, not analyzed, just seen and understood by someone who had been where I was, who knew the feeling of not recognizing yourself in the mirror anymore, of questioning everything that always seemed obvious. And that was terrifying. But it was also such a profound relief that I almost wanted to cry. "Thank you," I said, "for fixing the pipe, and for this." He nodded. "You're welcome." Silence again. But now it was almost comfortable. Almost. Raphael stood up, picked up the toolbox, picked his phone up from the floor and turned off the flashlight. Darkness returned, complete, heavy, intimate. I should have stepped aside, should have gotten out of the way, given him space to pass, But I didn't move, and neither did he. We stayed there, 2 meters apart, maybe less. I couldn't see his face in the total darkness, but I felt it. Felt his presence. Felt the heat. Felt his breath so close it seemed impossible that we were 2 separate people. And then I realized something that left me completely paralyzed. He wasn't leaving because he didn't want to. Just like I wasn't moving out of the way because I didn't want him to go. Logic screamed that this was wrong, that it was strange, that we were siblings, even if not by blood, that we lived in the same house, that there were lines that shouldn't be crossed, but none of that mattered in that moment. Because there, in that darkness, in that charged silence, in that impossible closeness, the only thing that mattered was what I was feeling. And what I was feeling was bigger than any rule, bigger than any fear, bigger than any logic. I wanted him to stay, wanted him to talk more, wanted to know more about the relationship that had ended, wanted to know if it had been with a man, wanted to know if he felt now, in this exact moment, the same thing I was feeling, this electricity, this tension, this desire to take a step forward, and at the same time, the desperate urge to run. But I didn't ask any of that, because asking would mean admitting, and admitting would mean facing, and facing meant accepting that something had changed, not just inside me, but between us. Raphael took a deep breath. I heard it, loud, deliberate, as if he was making a decision. Anything, he said, if you need to talk, or whatever. I'm here. Thank you, I repeated, because it was the only thing I could say. He passed by me, so close that I felt the fabric of his shirt brush against my arm. So close that, for a fraction of a second, I swore he had stopped, swore that he had hesitated. But maybe it was just my imagination. Maybe it was just my desire creating things that didn't exist. I heard his bedroom door close. I stayed in the dark, but I didn't feel alone. Something had changed. I had felt something for Raphael that went beyond friendship, beyond what I could categorize, and nothing changed the fact that I wanted him to have stayed. For 3 days, I became an expert at avoiding Raphael. I skipped breakfast, memorized his schedule in the hallway, ran from the gaze I felt burning on me during dinner, because if I looked, he would know. He would see that I hadn't slept properly in 3 nights, that I lay in the dark and relived every second of that moment. His hand on mine, his voice saying my name in a way no one had ever said it before. His smell, sweat, and soap, and something indefinable that was just his, the way he had stayed there, with me, in the dark, like there was nowhere else in the world he'd rather be. I was losing my mind. I had to be. Because none of this made sense. I wasn't gay. I had never been gay. I had dated girls. I had felt attraction. I had had normal, healthy relationships that ended for normal, healthy reasons. But then why couldn't I stop thinking about him? Why did my heart race when I heard his voice downstairs? Why did I dream about that moment in the bathroom and wake up with a tight chest and a physical, palpable need to go back there? I thought I could run away forever. But on Wednesday night, reality knocked down my door. I was in my room, trying to focus on a freelance project I should have delivered 2 days ago. The computer screen glowed in front of me, full of shapes and colors that made no sense. My brain was somewhere else, always somewhere else. A knock on the door. Lucas? Can I come in? Raphael? It's open. He came in, closing the door. The room seemed to shrink. Hi. Hi. He didn't move from the door. He stayed there, hands in his pockets, looking at me. That look. That damn look that unmade me. You're avoiding me, he said. It wasn't a question. I'm not, I lied. Badly. Yes, you are. He took a step into the room. Just one. But it was like he had crossed an invisible boundary. It's been 3 days since you barely look at me. I've been busy. Lucas. The way he said my name, again, like it was a prayer, like it mattered. I don't know what you want from me, I said, my voice coming out harsher than I meant. Nothing happened. You fixed the pipe. I thanked you, that's all. Silence. Raphael looked at me for a long moment. There was something in his expression I couldn't decipher. Disappointment, sadness, understanding. "Okay," he said finally, "if that's how you want it." He turned to leave, and something in me panicked. Wait. I don't know where it came from. The word just came out. Desperate. Necessary. Raphael stopped, his hand on the doorknob. He turned his face to the side, waiting. I stopped. My brain was empty and full at the same time. I don't know what's happening to me. He turned completely now. He looked at me. He waited. Since that night, I can't stop thinking about you, about what I felt. My voice shook. I've never felt like this about a man, and it shouldn't be you. I'm not. Raphael took another step closer. Not what? He asked softly. Gay? I nodded. Look at me, Raphael said. I couldn't. I stared down at the space between us, fed our bare feet on the floor. Please. And I did. Because when he asked like that, I couldn't say no. His eyes were right there. Brown with gold flecks I'd never noticed. Warm, steady. Like I was the only thing that mattered. You don't need to put a label on this right now, he said. You don't need to have it all figured out. You don't need to understand it. You just need to feel it. What if I don't even know what I'm feeling? My voice was barely there. Then we figure it out together, he said. He raised his hand slowly, giving me plenty of time to pull away. But I didn't move. I just stood there while his fingers found my face, my jaw, and then brushed a strand of hair back from my forehead. The touch was gentle, almost uncertain, but it felt like fire. I admitted. My words came out broken. I feel so much it actually hurts, and it terrifies me, and I don't know what to do with any of it. You don't have to do anything, he said. His fingers were still on my face, his thumb moving slowly across my cheek. We don't have to do anything right now, just be here, be real. That's enough. But it wasn't enough, because being close to him like this, feeling his touch on my skin, seeing the way he looked at me like I was precious, like I mattered, made everything inside me scream for more. And I was so afraid. Afraid of what it meant. Afraid of breaking some fundamental rule of the universe. Afraid that if I let myself want this, want him, I would never be able to go back to who I was before. Afraid that I wasn't that person anymore anyway. Raphael, I said. His name sounded different coming from me now. Weighted. Real. Yeah? He answered. Close enough that I could feel his breath against my lips. I don't know if I can do this. Do what? Any of it. All of it. Except that we. He didn't say anything. Just looked at me, waiting, letting me have space. What if I fuck this up? I whispered. What if we destroy the family? What if I'm not strong enough for what people will say? What if... Lucas, he said, his voice steady now, certain. Breathe. I took a breath. It was shaky. Not enough. You're getting ahead of yourself. We don't need to figure everything out right now. We don't need to solve it all tonight. So what do we do? He smiled then. Small. Sad. But understanding. We stay here. Right now, and see what happens. And we stayed. Standing there, in the middle of my room, with his hand on my face and my eyes on his eyes, and the whole universe reduced to this impossible space between our bodies. I don't know how long it lasted. It could have been seconds. It could have been hours. All I knew was that something had changed. Again. Something that couldn't be undone. Because for the first time, I had said it out loud. I had admitted it. Not with the right words, not with clarity or certainty, but enough. Enough for Raphael to know. Enough for me to not be able to pretend anymore. And now we were here. On this threshold. In this space between what we were and what we could be. And I had no idea what came next. And that's when Raphael spoke. Softly. almost a whisper, as if the words were so heavy that he needed to deliver them with care. "I think I know what you mean," he said quietly. "I feel it too." My breath caught. "You do?" "For a while now, yeah," he said, and it was as if the ground had disappeared from under my feet. Not in a bad way, in the way that everything I thought was solid, everything I thought I knew about myself, about him, about us, had just become something completely different. Because I wasn't alone. This thing I'd been feeling, this thing that kept me awake in the middle of the night, that made me avoid his gaze at the breakfast table, that made me invent excuses so I wouldn't be alone with him in the same room. This thing I thought was only mine, only my madness, only my guilt. It wasn't. He felt it too. Raphael felt it too. I don't know how long we stood there, motionless, looking at each other, with his hand on my face and the entire world reduced to that tiny space between us. It could have been seconds. It could have been hours. All I knew was that something had changed. Again. But this time it wasn't just me. This time it was us. I thought I was losing my mind. My voice came out broken, trembling, as if the words were heavier than I could carry. Raphael shook his head, slowly, his fingers still warm against my skin. "You're not losing your mind, I promise you're not." And the way he said it, calm, steady, as if he knew exactly what I was feeling because he'd felt it too. As if he'd also spent nights awake trying to understand. As if he'd also looked at the ceiling of his room wondering if this was real, or if it was just imagination. As if he'd been afraid too. "I don't know what this means. I don't know what we do with this." I spoke softly, almost as if I were confessing a crime. Raphael took a deep breath, and for the first time since we'd entered that room, he took his hand away from my face. I missed it immediately. "I don't know either. But I think we don't need to know right now." He took a step back, small, just enough to create space between us. Not much, but enough. Just the fact that we're admitting it is already so much. And he was right. It was so much. It was everything. Because for the first time since this had started, since I'd realized I looked at him differently, since I'd begun to notice details I shouldn't notice, I wasn't alone in this. Raphael felt it too. Raphael didn't understand either. Raphael was afraid too. And somehow, knowing that made it all seem less terrifying. Or maybe more terrifying. I still wasn't sure, but at least now it was real. It wasn't just fantasy. It wasn't just me projecting something that didn't exist. It was real. And it was mutual. We stood there, motionless, in the middle of my room. His phone's light still on the floor, casting strange shadows on the walls, the sound of the quiet house around us. The world outside continuing as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. "Are you scared?" Raphael asked, softly, without judgment, just honest curiosity. I nodded, because there was no point in lying, not after everything we'd just admitted. "Very." He smiled, small, sad, understanding. "So am I." And there was something comforting in that, in the raw honesty, in the shared vulnerability, in the fact that we weren't pretending this was easy or simple or that we knew what to do with it. We didn't know. But we knew we weren't alone. I think we should. Take some time. "Process this," Raphael said, his voice careful, as if he were choosing each word with precision. I agreed, because he was right. We needed to process, needed to understand what this meant. For us, for our family, for everything. But as he spoke, as he suggested we give each other space, I couldn't help but notice that he still hadn't left the room. And I hadn't asked him to leave either. We just stayed there, in this strange space between admitting and acting, between feeling and doing something with what we felt. "Do you think this is wrong?" I asked, and I hated how small my voice sounded. uncertain, like I was still trying to figure out the world. Raphael was quiet for a moment, really thinking about it. And I loved that about him. That he didn't just throw out some easy answer. That he actually considered it before speaking. I think, he started. I think we don't get to choose what we feel. We just feel it. He looked at me then, and I don't think that something real and honest can be wrong, even when it's complicated. Even when it's complicated. The phrase echoed in my chest, because it was complicated. Very complicated. We were technically family. My father had married his mother. We lived in the same house, shared the same space, the same meals, the same routine. If someone found out, if our parents knew, if anyone from outside looked at us and saw what was really happening, I couldn't even imagine the consequences. But at the same time, standing there, looking into his eyes, seeing the same confusion and the same fear and the same strange hope that I felt reflected back at me. At the same time, I couldn't regret it, because this was real, more real than anything I'd ever felt for anyone else. And maybe Raphael was right. Maybe we didn't choose what we felt. Maybe we just felt. And what mattered was what we did with it. We don't need to decide anything tonight, Raphael said, like he knew what I was thinking. We admitted it. That's a step, right? A step, yeah. It was huge. Yesterday I was still lying to myself, pretending I didn't feel anything, pretending it was normal to live in the same house as him without it tearing me apart. And now we'd said it out loud, to each other. There was no taking that back. Okay, I finally said, because I didn't have anything else. Yeah, we don't need to figure it all out tonight. Raphael nodded, and then, slowly, he turned. He picked his phone up off the floor. The light lit up his face for a second, showing an expression I couldn't quite decipher. Tiredness, maybe. Or relief. Or fear. Or all of those things at once. Good night, Lucas. Night, Raphael. And then he left. Opened the door. Went back through the dark hallway. His bedroom door closed quietly behind him. And I stayed there. Alone again. In the middle of my room. With my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. But this time, being alone was different. Because now I knew. Raphael felt it too. Raphael didn't understand either. Raphael was afraid too. And somehow, knowing that made all the difference. I sat on my bed, legs weak, head spinning, trying to process everything that had just happened. We'd admitted it, out loud, to each other. And there was no undoing that. Not that I wanted to. Because for the first time in weeks, maybe months, I didn't feel completely lost. I still didn't know what would happen. Still didn't know how we'd deal with it. Still didn't know if it would work out or if it would blow up in our faces. But I knew one thing. I wasn't alone. And for now, that night, in the darkness of my room, with the sound of his breathing still echoing in my memory, and the feeling of his hand on my face still burning on my skin. For now, that was enough. I lay down on my bed, looked at the ceiling. The same ceiling I'd stared at hundreds of times before, trying to understand what was happening to me. But this time, it was different. This time, I wasn't trying to understand alone. This time I knew that on the other side of the wall, in the room next to mine, Raphael was probably doing the same thing. Looking at his ceiling, processing, feeling, afraid, but not alone. Just like me. And maybe, just maybe, that was all we needed for now. To admit it. To feel it. To know we weren't alone. The rest. We'd figure that out later. I closed my eyes. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel that crushing weight on my chest. That feeling of carrying a secret that would destroy me from the inside. It was still heavy. Still terrifying. Still complicated. But now it was shared. And that somehow made all the difference. I don't know when I fell asleep. Don't know how long I lay there, going over every word we'd said, every look, every silence, every breath. But when I finally closed my eyes for real, when I finally let exhaustion take me, I didn't dream of fear. I didn't dream of guilt. I dreamed of his hand on my face, of his voice saying, "I feel it too," of the certainty that no matter what happened next, in that moment, that night, in the darkness of my room, I hadn't been alone, and neither had Raphael. And maybe that, after all, was the beginning of something neither of us knew yet how to name. But it was real, very real, and impossible to ignore. But ignoring was exactly what I would try to do, and fail miserably at. 3 days later, I woke up knowing something I'd never said out loud before. I'm gay. It didn't destroy me the way I thought it would. It didn't panic me. It was just real. A truth I'd buried deep for so long that when it finally surfaced, it felt almost like relief. Almost. Because it wasn't just relief. There was fear. Real fear. Fear of what it meant. Of what my mom would think. Of what my dad would say. Of how the rest of the world would react to this. But in that moment, alone in my room with the house waking up around me, I let myself say it. I'm gay. And I'm into Raphael. Both things were true. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't curiosity. It was attraction. It was desire. It was, I don't know, something bigger than that. Something that made me want to be near him. Hear his voice. Feel his presence in the same space as me. And in the last 3 days, since that night in my room, I hadn't been able to look at him right. We hadn't talked about what happened. Not really. After the confession, we stood there in the hallway for a few more minutes, whispering things I could barely process. He said he wouldn't pressure me, that I could take all the time I needed, that he understood, and then we went to our rooms. And since then, nothing. Silence. Not the kind of silence heavy, weighted with anger or hurt, but the kind of silence where two people are processing something too big to fit into words. I'd run into him in the kitchen in the morning. We'd share the bathroom, sit at the same dinner table with my dad and his mom asking questions about our day, and we'd answer on autopilot. But we didn't look at each other, not really. Because if we did, I knew I'd see that night all over again. The darkness, his voice saying, "I feel it too." And I didn't know if I was ready to face what came after. But now, lying in my bed, with the morning light warming me, I realized I couldn't run anymore. Couldn't keep up this strange dance where we pretended nothing had changed. Because everything had changed. And I had to face it. I had to face him. I got up, put on an old t-shirt and shorts, and left the room. The house was quiet. My dad and Raphael's mom had already left for work. It was Saturday, but they'd gone to take care of something at the market, which meant Raphael and I were alone. And in that silence, anything could happen. I came down slowly, pulse racing with each step. I could hear the kitchen, water, the clink of a pan. He was there. I took a breath and went in. Raphael had his back to me at the sink, washing something. White t-shirt, gray sweatpants, bare feet on the cold floor. Broad shoulders, relaxed. Like nothing had happened. Like we hadn't stood in the dark of my room saying things we'd never said out loud. I watched him for a second. Then he turned off the water, dried his hands, and turned around. Our eyes met. And the air just left the room. He didn't smile, didn't say anything. Just looked at me. And I could see it all in that look. The same fear I was feeling. The uncertainty. And underneath it, hope. "Morning," he said quietly. "Morning," I answered. The silence stretched between us. "Did you make coffee?" I asked. "Yeah, you want some?" He poured. We stood there drinking in silence, and then he spoke. "We should probably talk about what happened, right?" I stared at my coffee, watching the steam rise. "Yeah, we should. Look, it's okay if you don't know what to say. Seriously. I'm not going to get upset with you. But I needed you to know, I don't regret any of it. What I said. What happened. I swallowed. I don't either. The words were out before I could stop them, and I meant them. I didn't regret it. Was I terrified? Yeah. Confused about what happens next? Absolutely. But regret? No. Raphael exhaled like he'd been holding his breath the whole time. Good, he said softly. We stayed there for another moment, and then I finally looked at him. I think I'm gay, I said, just like that. No softening it, no dancing around it, just the truth. Raphael looked at me. There was no surprise on his face, no judgment either, just acceptance. Okay, he said. How are you feeling? I let out a laugh that came out weird. Scared, confused, relieved, all of it at once. That's normal, he said. That's a lot. What about you? I asked. Did you always know? About yourself? Raphael thought for a second, hand on the back of his neck. More or less. It took me a while to get comfortable with it, but yeah. I always kind of knew. I just fought it for way too long. Does your mom know? My dad? He shook his head. No, and I'm not sure I want to tell them. Not now, anyway. It's private. Until I'm ready. That made sense. So, I said, my voice uncertain. What about us? What do we do with this? Raphael was quiet. Then he put his mug down, stepped closer. Not too close, but close enough that I could feel his body heat. We don't have to do anything right now, he said. We don't have to label it or decide anything. We just be, you know? Be, I repeated. Yeah, just be. Let it happen naturally. No rush, no pressure. What if it goes wrong? What if someone finds out? He smiled a little. Then we figure it out. Together. Together. The word hung there between us, and my fear eased a bit. Because he wasn't asking me to have it all figured out. Wasn't pushing me to decide anything. Was just here. With me. And maybe that's what I needed. Someone who wouldn't rush me, who wouldn't demand answers, who just let me be. I took a breath. Okay, I said. We'll just let it happen. He smiled then, small but real. And he reached out his hand, not to pull me close, not to force anything, just offering. I looked at his hand, at his fingers, at the small scars from manual work. And then I reached out with mine. Our fingers touched. And that was it. A touch. Light. Brief. But it meant everything. Because in that touch, there was acceptance. There was promise. There was the possibility of something I didn't even know I could want. Raphael let go of my hand after a few seconds, and we went back to drinking our coffee in silence. But it was a different silence now. It wasn't heavy. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was peace. And for the first time in days, I felt that maybe, just maybe, I was going to be able to handle this. Who I was. What I felt. What it meant for my future. Because I wasn't alone. And neither was Raphael. And maybe that was enough. Days later. I don't know exactly how many. 3? 5? Time lost that predictable linearity. Each day since that night in the hallway seemed to exist in 2 simultaneous layers. The surface, where we were just step-siblings sharing a house, and the depth, where we were 2 people who had confessed the impossible to each other. The house stayed the same. The kitchen still smelled like coffee in the morning. Dad still read the newspaper at the table. His mother still talked too much about the neighbors during dinner. Everything rigorously normal, but nothing was the same. I noticed it now. Noticed how Raphael held his coffee mug a little more slowly when I walked into the kitchen. How his eyes found mine a half-second longer than socially necessary. How when I passed him in the narrow hallway, he never moved completely away, leaving that minimal space where my shoulder brushed his, brief enough to seem unintentional, long enough to be no accident. And I reciprocated. God forgive me. I reciprocated. I'd rest my hand on the kitchen counter right beside his when I grabbed a glass. I'd take longer than necessary to pass him in tight spaces. I'd smile when only we were looking. Small gestures, minuscule, invisible to anyone who didn't know what to look for. But we knew. The first night after the confession, I could barely sleep. I lay staring at my bedroom ceiling, listening to the sounds of the house settling around me. Dad snoring in the room next door. The refrigerator humming downstairs. And me, processing the reality that I'd said out loud what I'd never imagined I'd feel. That I liked him. My stepbrother. The man who lived in the room next to mine. And worse, that he liked me too. For years, I'd built an identity. Lucas, the guy who liked girls. Lucas, the graphic designer focused on his career. Lucas, the son who followed the rules and didn't cause problems. And then, in one night, with a leaking pipe and a conversation in the dark, that whole structure crumbled. At first, I felt panic. That kind of silent panic that wakes you at 3 a.m. with your heart racing. Who was I now? What did this mean? How could I look at our parents knowing this enormous, complicated secret? But then, something shifted. It was on the second day. We came down for breakfast almost at the same time. He had his back to me, stirring sugar into his coffee. And when he turned to me, our eyes met. For maybe 2 seconds. And in those 2 seconds, I saw everything. The same uncertainty I felt. The same fragile hope. The same silent determination not to pretend nothing had happened. And I realized I wasn't alone in this. For the first time in my life, someone saw me completely. Not the edited version I showed the world. Not the performative Lucas who smiled in all the right places and said all the right things. But me, with all my confusion and fear and desire and guilt. And he didn't run. That changed everything. I started to accept. Not overnight, not with some dramatic revelation, but gradually, in small, manageable pieces. I accepted that maybe I'd never been purely heterosexual, that maybe there'd always been this part of me waiting for the right person to wake up. I accepted that person being Raphael didn't make what we felt any less real. I accepted that life rarely organizes itself into neat, acceptable categories. I accepted that I was queer. That this word, which once seemed distant and abstract, now fit me. And more importantly, I accepted that it was okay. On the 3rd or 4th day, we were having dinner. The full table, all 4 of us. My dad telling some story about work, his mother laughing too loudly. I pushed food around my plate, pretending to pay attention when I felt it. A touch. Light. Quick. Raphael's foot brushing mine under the table. My heart jumped. I looked up, and he was looking at his plate, expression perfectly neutral, but I saw the corner of his mouth curve. The smallest of smiles. Private. Just for me. I had to bite my lip to keep from smiling too. It was ridiculous. Juvenile. Absolutely inappropriate for the situation. And yet, I felt a wave of happiness so pure it almost hurt. Because it was real. It wasn't just that night in the hallway anymore. Hidden in the darkness where dangerous things could be said. It was daylight. It was the dinner table. It was real life, complicated and messy and full of risks. And still, he chose to touch me. Chose to tell me, without words, I'm still here. I still see you. I didn't change my mind. That night, after everyone went to bed, I found Raphael in the kitchen. He was leaning against the counter, drinking water, lit only by the faint light from the microwave. When I came in, he didn't move, just looked at me, waiting. I closed the door behind me. Not completely, just enough to give us the illusion of privacy. "Hi," I said quietly, because even though we were alone, it still felt dangerous to speak too loud. "Hi," he responded. And his voice had that soft quality that only appeared when it was just the 2 of us. I stood there in the middle of the kitchen, hands in my pockets because I didn't know what to do with them. There was so much I wanted to say, so much I was processing, discovering, accepting. But what came out was, "Are you okay with all of this?" He tilted his head, thinking. Then he said, "I'm better than I expected to be. What about you?" "Scared," I admitted. "But good, I think." He smiled. That small, gentle smile that made me feel safe. It's normal to be scared. It's all so complicated. I know. They can never know. Not now. Maybe never. "I know," he repeated, but there was no frustration in his voice, just calm acceptance, as if he'd already thought through all of this before I even processed it. I took a step toward him, then another, until I was close enough to feel the warmth of his body, close enough to see the fine lines around his eyes, the shadow of stubble, the way his throat moved when he swallowed. "Raphael," I said, testing his name in my mouth in this new context. "I don't know what I'm doing. Neither do I. But I don't want to pretend that nothing happened." Something shifted in his face, softened. "Neither do I." And then he did something that surprised me. He reached out slowly, giving me all the time in the world to pull away if I wanted to. And he touched my face. Just his fingers, light, tracing the line of my jaw. I closed my eyes. I leaned into the touch. "We have time," he murmured. "It doesn't have to be all at once." I opened my eyes. "Aren't you afraid? Of regretting this?" "You?" He shook his head. "No. The timing? The situation? Always. But you, Lucas. No." Something broke inside me. Or maybe it fixed itself. I don't know. But I felt tears burning behind my eyes, and before I could control them, they were streaming down my face. "Hey," Raphael said softly, wiping the tears away with his thumb. "Hey, it's okay." I spent so long thinking there was something wrong with me, I managed to say, my voice wavering. Because I never felt like this with anyone. And then you showed up, and I didn't understand, and I was so afraid it meant I was broken, or confused, or... "You're not broken," he interrupted, firm. "You're discovering yourself, and that's beautiful, Lucas. That's brave." "I don't feel brave, but you are. Being here, accepting this, accepting yourself, that's the most courageous thing you can do." And while I stood there, in that dimly lit kitchen, with the man who had turned my world upside down holding me like I was something precious, I realized something fundamental. Maybe courage isn't the absence of fear. Maybe it's making the right choice even when you're terrified. Choosing truth, even when the lie is easier. Choosing yourself, even when the whole world tells you to be someone else. And in that moment, I chose. I chose to accept that I was queer. I chose to accept that I liked Raphael in a way that didn't fit in any comfortable box. I chose to accept that our situation was complicated and scary and full of obstacles. And yet I still chose it. I chose him. I chose us. "Thank you," I whispered, because there were no words big enough for what he'd given me in that dark hallway days ago. Permission to be honest. Space to be confused. Acceptance, even when I could barely accept myself. He smiled. "You don't have to thank me." "I do." I took a deep breath. "You could have pretended nothing was happening. Could have left me alone with all my confusion. But you didn't. And that changed everything." We stayed like that for another moment. Then, because the risk of someone waking up was real, we separated. But before he left, he took my hand, squeezed once. And even after he let go, I felt the ghost of that touch all night long. The days that followed were like that. Stolen moments, glances across the dinner table, hands touching when we passed dishes. private smiles that no one else could see. And slowly, I began to rebuild my identity. Not the same as before, but something new, something truer. Lucas, who liked graphic design and strong coffee and that quiet space between waking up and having to face the day. Lucas, who was queer, even if he was still figuring out exactly what that meant for him. Lucas, who was in love with his half-brother in a way that was complicated and probably impossible, but real anyway. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's choosing authenticity despite it. That afternoon, Raphael knocked. "Want to watch something?" he asked. "Yeah, sure." We went downstairs. Once the house quieted, he reached over and took my hand. I didn't let go. I don't know what happens next. I don't know if we'll ever be able to tell anyone. But in that moment, fingers intertwined. I was exactly where I needed to be. Not pretending, just existing. And maybe that's how these stories start, with something as simple as a leaking pipe. You just have to be brave enough to let it change you.